Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. In today's episode, we'll explore a vital yet often overlooked aspect of financial planning, end-of-life and legacy planning. Navigating this sensitive territory with empathy and clarity can make a world of difference for families. I'm joined by a special guest, Sara Ecklein. Sara's the founder of Trust and Honor, a fiduciary agency committed to making end-of-life planning and financial transitions seamless and meaningful. In addition to over a decade of professional experience, Sara has managed complex cases, supported senior care initiatives, and volunteered with organizations like Alzheimer's Association and Sacramento Hospice Consortium. She's also the host of the Legacy of Love podcast, where she shares practical advice and heartfelt stories about family support, trust administration, and end-of-life care. Sara, welcome to the show.
Marc, thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to today's topic because I think it is definitely an overlooked aspect of financial planning. And I know the work you do, it's unique, it's deeply personal. What led you to create Trust and Honor and focus on these types of services?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I love sharing my personal journey into finding this work. And it really started for me with being witness to a loved one's final 3 days of life. And that really had just a profound impact on me and the work that I do. Being witness to her death, I really was forced into the present moment. And I kind of can describe it as more of a spiritual experience where kind of past and present and all these worries just melted away for me. And I didn't know exactly, I didn't have a plan, but I just felt this leaning in to being present with her death. And so I really followed that. Originally, I thought I would be a hospice nurse. You know, I definitely saw where, and I still see, where most people really lean away from this. They don't want to look at their own mortality, and they also don't want to be with their loved ones when they're dying. And I think collectively, especially in the US, we're really kind of like an anti-death culture. We don't want to talk about it. We only want to talk about the new, the sexy, the younger generation. And, you know, our elders are pushed to the side. So that really started my professional journey. I went back to school and I thought I was going to be a hospice nurse, as I said. And I quickly realized that that wasn't quite right. And I had a friend, a family friend that was a professional fiduciary, and she was like, I think you're going to love this work. So I went and found myself working for a professional fiduciary out in Sacramento, California. And really the rest is history. I just fell in love with the work. There's this personal finance component. There's the legal aspect. There's obviously the end of life care. It's interesting work, and it's absolutely just leading with heart and service. That's what really sparked my passion. That was over 11 years ago. And I started my own practice, Trust and Honor, in 2021.
So who typically needs these types of end-of-life planning services that you provide?
In California, we do things a bit different. We have a license for professional fiduciaries. Now, some professionals like an attorney or a CPA, their license allows them to do this work. But in California, we also have a special license for professional fiduciaries. And I describe it as an umbrella term. So when I'm acting as a fiduciary, I could act in different roles. So sometimes it's as a healthcare decision maker. I could be a trustee. I could be a conservator. It really depends on the client and the need in the case. In my firm, I specialize in trust administration and special needs trusts. And I also love working with clients in the planning phase. And that's usually when I'm named in successor roles. So I'm actually being named in estate planning documents as a successor trustee, as an alternate agent in a durable power of attorney document and also advanced healthcare directive. Every fiduciary kind of has their niche, their area of focus. Some fiduciaries, all they want to do is kind of court supervised cases. So that's more of the estate administration, like probate, conservatorships. That's kind of the other area that I don't focus on. So I work with clients privately. I think with that, and I think part of that also probably has to do with that I'm younger. So it also helps if someone doesn't need services now, I'm not nearing retirement anytime soon.
Yeah, you mentioned fiduciary. Maybe can you just give some background on what a fiduciary is and how that separates your business from maybe another business that's not licensed as one of those fiduciaries in California?
Yeah, so the term fiduciary really means we're putting our client's best interest, not my own. And that's going back to the licensing. The professional fiduciary license is specific in the state of California. I believe we're only one of 2 states that has licensing. And when it comes to probate law, that's really going to be state specific. For listeners that are outside of California, there's what's called the National Guardian Association. I'm also considered a national guardian. And you can look up professionals based on your state and that organization. So I'm happy to share that link and you can include that in the show notes.
When do people usually engage with you and your company?
It's usually long before services are needed. And that's where I'm being named in estate planning documents. For active cases, that's going to look very different, where it's either someone that's stepping down, so the current fiduciary, and sometimes that's just another professional who's nearing retirement. Sometimes it's a family member that no longer wants to act in that role. And then there's also kind of those court cases that I was talking about before. And what's, I think, really interesting about the work is I find that in general, there's 2 real camps of why and when I get involved. And it's either the camp of the clients that have a plan. And so that's kind of what we were talking about before. They're meeting with their estate planning attorney. Typically, these are high net worth individuals. They have a whole team of professionals around that they're working with. Their estate planning attorney, their financial advisor, and typically a tax professional as well, and then bringing me on board. And then there's also the camp of clients that maybe they didn't have a plan. Or they had a plan that wasn't really thorough and well thought out, or there was a lot of issue in the plan in the sense of the family dynamic and dysfunction. And so that's typically where you'll see, heavily litigated cases, someone needing to be removed or no one agreeing, the family not agreeing. And so that's when the courts get involved and say, you know what, we need to put a neutral party, a professional in.
Oh, so the courts will actually place someone like yourself into...
Yes.
Okay. If it's not like the courts and if it is during the estate planning process, is it the attorney that usually drives having an trust administration done outside, or is it the client who may say, I don't really have a good person who I feel comfortable?
Yeah, it really depends. It's a great question. I find that most of the time, an estate planning attorney is sitting down with their clients, they're drawing up with their estate plan, and for whatever reason, it makes sense to have a professional there. Now, it might be that these are solo agers, so people without children or their children don't live locally or aren't able to act. I also serve as a trustee for special needs trusts. So for families with disabled children, their disabled child will never be able to really administer a trust or estate or make healthcare decisions for their parents. So families like that, they're going to really need to partner with someone. If they don't have a trusted person in their community or extended family, then that's where working with a professional makes sense. So that's typically where the estate planning attorney is making that referral. I would say our profession is pretty small and new. Licensing just began in 2007. And I believe there's around 900 to maybe 1,000 actively licensed professional fiduciaries in the state of California. That's where I think having more awareness about this work, that there are professionals like us that exist. And I would also say another reason where I'm finding in my practice where families are opting and wanting to work with a professional, they might have kids, but at least in the Bay Area, I'm based in Silicon Valley, a lot of the children are either top executives and have really demanding jobs, or they don't live in the area. And so what about their parents as they age? Families like this need to also plan. And then another example is we're seeing more and more, second, third marriages and blended families. And so in those instances too, it can be nice to have a neutral party so that none of the children are feeling like someone's playing favorites.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are some of the, I guess I'll call them common pitfalls or misunderstandings that arise when going through like end of life transition?
What I'm really finding is that even for clients that, are working with me and an estate planning attorney in the planning phase, and let's just talk about statistics. In the US, 1 in 3 people have an estate plan. So that leaves 2/3 of people. That's the majority of people in this country do not have an estate plan in place. So the people that I'm sitting with are, ahead of most. But even when we're sitting down, time and time again, clients are only thinking about after death. And that's one of the biggest pitfalls, and I think myths and misunderstandings about what an estate plan is. Yes, your trust and estate will carry on past your lifetime, and that it is an important, crucial piece. But what about at your incapacity? For couples that are married, sure, when there's both of you, you can trust that your partner, you're having these conversations, hopefully, about what you want in end of life. But what about the surviving spouse? And so time and time and again, I would say more than half of clients that are sitting down and that I'm meeting with, they're not even thinking about that scenario. So thinking about your advanced healthcare directive, thinking about your durable power of attorney. And most people don't understand the difference. Let's just talk about that example about incapacity. In California, most people are going to need a trust if they own real estate. I don't know the exact number, but it's around currently 180,000. Otherwise, your estate will go through probate. So to avoid that, that's where most attorneys are recommending a trust. So anyways, as a trustee, if you're incapacitated, your trustee is going to become active. And then also your durable power of attorney would become active. A lot of times people are coming to me and they think, I only need your services for a trustee. And when I'm asking them questions about a durable power of attorney for finance, I'm realizing they also want to name me in that document. And my assumption was these are conversations that attorneys were having with their clients. And I'm finding that attorneys aren't spending that time kind of explaining these documents. So that's a lot of why I love having conversations like this, is hopefully I'm reaching more people so that they can ask better questions and really consider the people that they're naming in their documents, not only if they're able to do these jobs and sit in this role of making, end of life care decisions and managing your financial assets and, filing taxes, all of that stuff, but are they able to? And unfortunately, I'm finding in the world today, everyone has just so many demands and we're really living individually. Like we're not really in this collective community. And so the family system has changed and I'm finding more and more families, it does make sense to work with professionals.
Yeah, you mentioned 2/3 of people don't really have an estate plan. Do you think the main reason is going back to kind of what you said, like opening? Is that just people don't like confronting death or talking about death? Or do you think there's other reasons that it's just too complex to get an estate plan together, or they just put it off and feel, okay, that's in the future? Why do you think there's such a low adoption of people getting estate plans?
I really think that, yes, facing our own death, our own mortality, that's a big piece, but that's not everything. I think that a lot of families are just feeling intimidated. I think there's also this myth that an estate plan is only for the wealthy. Like, oh, you hear about, trust fund, and there's all this assumption about that you have a lot of wealth. What I'm finding more and more is it's like you could have a retirement account, own a house, and it still makes sense for your family to set up a trust. At least, again, speaking specifically in the state of California, that's again where partnering with professionals, partnering with and finding an estate planning attorney is important and an essential step. But I think that also the estate plan, it hits upon so many topics that most people avoid, like death is one, but also money, right? And also if you and, and your spouse, or maybe you and your kids, there's areas that we don't want to talk about who gets what, that's easy to kick that can down the curb.
Yeah. And I think kind of what you mentioned is, like an estate planning attorney, they'll help. And sometimes, like you said, sometimes they're not having like the full conversation, but they'll help. Okay, we need these 3 things. We need either, a will, maybe a trust, durable power of attorney, healthcare directive. But there's so much more that goes into someone aging, someone that end of life transition. Where are they going to live? The financial aspect of it, that there is probably that gap there in the entire picture of how aging, or how, someone getting older, closer to death goes. That's probably missing right now from that estate planning process.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I mean, that's a bit of where I launched my podcast, The Legacy of Love, to have more of these conversations, because the estate plan, I think, is really the starting place. But after that, there's so many pieces that we still need to do. So funding the trust is also a huge step. Most attorneys don't provide that service. If they do, it's going to be very costly. So what does that mean? Once we have an estate plan, you have to put your assets in the trust. And so that's going to look like retitling property. So your bank accounts, your primary home, the deed needs to get reported. Most of that is, I would say, most of the time I am seeing that estate planning attorneys are doing that one step of, recording the updated title with the name of the trust. But after that, it really falls on the client to do. And if your bank accounts haven't been updated to the trust, you could have the perfectly drafted estate plan and still run into the risk of your estate being probated if those assets are outside of the trust. So that's one big piece that I'm finding that a lot of people aren't really understanding. I think it's a similar, I'm sure that you've seen examples of people will be funding their 401k, but it's only sitting in cash, and they didn't know that extra step of investing the funds. Unfortunately, I do know people in my life where that was the case. 20 years went by.
It happens way too often than it should, but yeah.
Yes. I think that example, there's been more of that that probably people have heard of. And but this estate planning piece, I find it's very similar. There's that extra step. Also getting your affairs organized and clear for when someone is going to need to be taking over. Sure, we hope we all live that long life, but not all of us do. And I think most of us know those examples where there's a sudden heart attack or, a fatal car crash, and someone needs to step into that situation. If you're a pack rat,
yeah.
If some of your accounts are all paperless and electronic, and then others are paper statements, that's going to be a mess for someone to try to figure out, what is owed and where are your assets. So communicating that, especially to the people that are named as those proxies, like a trustee or executor, is I think a crucial piece. And that's not going to all show on the estate plan. That's really for you to spend the time to organize. And then the other crucial piece that I'm finding that most people aren't doing is having the willingness to have these conversations with their loved ones. Most families, I think, aren't going to need to work with a professional like myself. And so they're naming their family, their friends, someone in trust, a non-professional. And so often they're never having that conversation with that person of A, that you're letting them know that they're named in that role, but B, of what their wishes are.
You start working with someone, maybe never met them before. How do you take their personal values, their wishes, and incorporate that into their estate planning or their trust or whatever they're doing going forward?
Well, A, it's definitely having the conversations, listening, asking questions. I think that I can be a little bit more to the point being a professional because I've done this for over a decade and I kind of know things to look out for. But I think that the other piece is this isn't one conversation. This is many conversations. So that's, I would say, another piece is that for families where things are a success, let's say everything goes according to the plan, the entire family is feeling onboarded and knowing what the wishes are, and nothing is a surprise. That's because the family hasn't only just checked off the box, we did our estate plan and you shove it in the drawer and never think about it again. This is families where we are talking about death and dying, and it's a regular topic. And I think that that's where, again, there's just a lot of misconception about this area. We think that it's kind of an on and off switch, but for most people, with death and dying, also with what our wishes are, these are going to change as we age. And really understanding that the estate plan, these are living documents that can always be changed. So this should be something that I think that we should be reviewing and reflecting on throughout our lives. You could have a quick annual kind of check-in with yourself, and every attorney kind of has their rule of thumb, but what I'm hearing is around 3 to 5 years. It might make sense to book another appointment and see if updating your estate plan makes sense.
How do you gave the example of, an estate that wasn't well organized and it was a mess for the heirs or the beneficiaries of it. And I've seen that myself, where it can take years to untangle a messy estate. A lot what I've seen is people resist a little bit because they feel like they're potentially giving up control over their assets, and they don't like necessarily to confront the fact that they are aging and they are going to die at some point. How do you work with them to kind of get them to buy in to the process?
I think that the sad reality is the families that I am working with, that's going through my intake process, that I have my whole onboarding process of asking kind of all of the questions and details and then sitting down and having these conversations. These are the families that want to do it.
What do you see as far as trends in this area going forward? Do you see do you see technology coming in and helping out at all with any of this with any of the process, or is it still always going to be a person to person?
I think I am seeing companies, like I was just speaking with and found out about this company. It's called Buried in Work. They also have a podcast, and there's a whole technology to help people plan and get their files in order. So it makes that, taking over for a family member or professional that much easier. But they also have a software for like trustees and executors of an estate. And, the software is really built out to do that administration. So I think with that, this field, this industry can use a lot of technology, because a lot of professionals that I know, they're still doing only paper. There's definitely a lot of people where they only want to do fax. So I look forward to the innovation there. But in terms of working with people one-on-one and professionals like myself being needed, I think that's absolutely, we're going to be needed that much more, because there's only so much that technology can do. And I'm not a big proponent of DIY estate plans at all. I think partnering with professionals, of knowing your family's unique needs, making that investment upfront, it pays back in dividends in ways that you just can't even, that most families will never know. And that's where, as a professional trustee and seeing those bad case scenarios, working with professionals where this is their expertise is, I think, a crucial step and a crucial piece to a family's success. But I also see that the need for professionals like myself is only going to grow with baby boomers. The senior population is just growing exponentially with this generation aging. And then also what we were talking about before of family systems changing. Families aren't like living on the same street as they were before, like in the 1950s. What I'm finding more so is there's a lot of people that aren't having children, or they're having less children. And so that kind of burden and that supporting mom and dad. And we also don't live in a culture where the automatic assumption is mom and dad are going to come live with us. That's available for some people, but some cultures and in the past, I think that's more of an expectation. And we don't have that here in the US. That's where I think professionals like myself, estate planning, elder law attorneys, all of this is just going to be so, so needed.
You're also the host of your own podcast, the Legacy of Love podcast. How does that platform allow you to expand your mission and share your expertise?
Yeah, well, it's having a lot of conversations like this. I sit down with a lot of estate planning attorneys, also experts that are in finance, tax professionals, healthcare professionals. We have a lot of conversations about end-of-life care planning, really wanting to demystify what the estate plan is. That's a big piece, and making that information accessible to everyone. I think that as professionals, there can be kind of this more top-down approach of, I'm the expert, I'm the authority. And so much of the work that I do and what's inspired me to have my own business and now launch the podcast is to really come and meet people where they're at and hopefully demystify this so it's not as intimidating. And I think most people are really intimidated by working with attorneys. So understanding what these documents are, these are conversations that we're having, and then talking about so much that goes beyond the estate plan. How can we really not only leave a legacy of love, but how we can live that day to day? I had my daughter, I became a mother at the end of 2022, and really becoming a parent has only just expanded on my love of this work and my mission of really bringing peace and love to this area that I think, most are only leading with their expertise and their pedigree, and helping families really consider what they want to leave behind is just so important. And I think is such an important piece as we consider what legacy means to us.
All right, Sara, that's all the questions I have for you today. I want to thank you for joining me on an episode of The Agent of Wealth and sharing your expertise. Before we go, how best can our listeners learn more about what you do and get in touch with you?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. You've asked wonderful questions. So I appreciate you having me again. Yeah. So a few places I would say on social media, I am on Instagram, Facebook, but LinkedIn is where I'm most active. So if people want to follow along or send me a message, please reach out. And then also, I would love for listeners to know that you can go to my website, trustandhonor.co. And I have a free Legacy of Love workbook that listeners are welcome to just put in their contact information, their email, and they can download that. It's really, the workbook is to expand beyond that estate plan of getting clear what are our values and wishes that kind of extend, beyond the legal documents, and really getting people from shifting from, okay, let's just check this off the list of things to do, to really connect with the deeper purpose and meaning and intention behind their legacy.
Great. We'll include that information in the resources section of the show notes. Thanks again, Sara, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Don't forget to follow the Agent of Wealth on the platform you listen from and leave us a review of the show. We're currently accepting new clients, and if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our advisors, please do so at bautisfinancial.com/call.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.